Welcome back, everyone. It's Eric and Xander from Rare Candy here. Today we are back to discuss some new details that actually just got revealed about the new Sword and Shield era of the TCG. And actually, before we recorded this was actually planned on being a Sword and Shield speculation video and kind of like our wish list for what we wanted from the next era of the TCG. And, while we were planning this video, a lot of details about the set kind of came out. So we were like, you know what, let's just shift gears and we'll just kind of cover some of these exciting new revelations, or, not exciting for some people of the community, but these important new revelations for these cards, and go over kind of what we have in store for us. And then at the end of this video, we will go over a lot of our speculation and, some of our wish list that we want to see from this new era of the game. So we have a couple of different things to talk about today. We have the first Pokemon V were revealed in full. We have a couple of those to go over. We have a couple of supporters and a new rule change to go over before we get to kind of our wish list and speculation for this set. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about the Pokemon V. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things here. Up until now, we've had a couple of half reveals of the legendaries from the set, but now we have a couple of fully revealed Pokemon. All of their attacks are on the card, their HP, all of that stuff. They are going to be from some new starter sets that are coming out in Japan. So these very well could make their way into our official set. But as of right now, these are just starter deck promos in Japan. So for you guys who are unaware, Pokemon V, of course, is going to be the new sort of ultra rare mechanic of the Sword and Shield era, much like we've had GXs in the past and EXs. Pokemon V is kind of the new mechanic that fills that type of a role in the card game. And so it's important to note there are Pokemon V, then there are Pokemon V Max. We have not actually formally seen any Pokemon V Max, so it's hard to kind of speculate as to how those are going to be, which, we'll probably get to later in this video as well. But right now we are just looking at the different Pokemon V. And out of the ones that were revealed, we have a Celebi-V, Victini-V, Keldeo-V, Tapu Koko-V, and Regirock-V. So quickly, let's just run through what each of these do. So Celebi-V is a basic Pokemon with 180 HP, 1 retreat cost, and fire weakness. And its first attack just costs 1 grass energy. It says search your deck for up to 2 Pokemon and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. And its second attack for a grass and colorless does 50 plus 20 more for each of your benched Pokemon. Victini-V has 190 HP, water weakness, and a 2 retreat cost. And its first attack for a colorless energy says attach up to 3 fire energies from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way that you like. And its second attack for 2 fire energy does 30 times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. Keldeo-V has 210 HP, lightning weakness, and a 2 retreat cost. And its first attack for a single water energy just does 40 damage. And its second attack is kind of a beefed up version of the old Keldeo EX's attack, Secret Sword. Same attack cost for 3 colorless energy and does 50 but plus 30 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. Tapu Koko-V has 200 HP, fighting weakness, and 0 retreat cost, and its first attack for a lightning energy is 20 damage and you draw 2 cards. And its second attack for 2 lightning energy and 1 colorless energy does 200 damage, but then this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. And the last of these Pokemon V, we have Regirock-V, has 220 HP, grass weakness, and a 3 retreat cost, and its first attack for a fighting energy and a colorless energy does 30 plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. And its second attack for 2 fighting energy and 1 colorless energy does 190, and this Pokemon does 30 damage to itself. So I definitely think there are some standouts out of these cards. I think overall they're a little bit underwhelming, but Xander, the one thing that has to jump out at us just looking at these is the HP buffs that we are seeing from all of these cards. It's kind of ridiculous, the power creep that we're seeing. And, we thought 170, 180 HP basics at a time was insane. And now we have those same types of Pokemon being buffed to over 200 HP, man. What do you think about that?
I mean, just going to quickly go through and compare the HP for each of these. In order, Celebi has 180. Celebi EX had 110. Victini has 190, and the EX had 110. Keldeo has 210, and the EX had 170. Coco's GX had 170. This one has 200, and Regirock had 180, and this one has 220. So just hysterical boosts to the HP of each of these, and it just really bothers me that we had EXs that were like 170 and 180 during the time that Celebi and Victini had EXs, and those were like the low bar of the EXs at the 110. Like Jirachi was the only thing lower than those, having 90. So the fact that these have 180 and 190 means that when we get to Pokemon that have like quote normal stats, like what's that going to look like? So Regirock, if it had close to that 180 margin and it's got 200 now, or 220 now, I definitely think that that's something that's very noticeable is the increase in HP. I think that a lot of these are actually pretty solid. The only one I'm not super impressed in is Regirock, just because Regirock doesn't have any like great acceleration that I can really see it with right now. Celebi, the first attack, Call for Friends, is obviously good, but the second attack is just Grass Colorless 150 if you have a full bench. Like, that's good. That's one-shotting a lot of the non-GX attackers in this format, so that's like an attack that I'm fine using. Victini, you either just put 3 energies in a place, you get like a mini nitro tank, or you can welder onto it and then just do a bunch of energy depending on how much is, or a bunch of damage depending on how much is on their active. Keldeo is just obviously better Secret Sword. Tapu Koko-V is the one that I'm impressed with the most. With Electro Power, you can make this first attack do like 80 and you draw 2 cards, and that's really good. And then just for Lightning Colorless, with 2 Electro Powers, you're one-shotting a Pikarom, or you can like set up damage with the first attack and then just use 1 Electro Power. And then, like I said, for Regirock, I'm not entirely certain about what I can really see with that card.
I think, like you said, Tapu Koko-V seems to be the best one out of the bunch. Has free retreat as well, which is dope because you can just retreat for free, then switch back to the active to reset it. We will have Dawnwing's Necrozma in the format too for a little bit, so you can theoretically reset it that way. But I mean, just think Pikarom does 200. That's its GX attack, or even if you're playing this in Pikarom after you use your GX attack, I mean, you just finish the game with this thing. You don't even full blitz anymore or anything like that. You just swing with this thing, just 200 for essentially no downside. A very small downside is, I think, insane. 200 HP, obviously, really good too. I think that's definitely my pick of the bunch. I think Victini also has some promise as well, just because it has essentially Gardevoir GX's attack for 2 fire, which is fine. And fire Pokemon, of course, can scale their damage pretty easily in this day and age. First attack, like I said, it's kind of like a mini Nitro tank. And what's cool, you can play this in greens variants if you want to. The only thing that's unfortunate about a lot of these cards right now is that they actually aren't searchable by what we have in the current format. I mean, I would not doubt that they are working on printing some new sort of search cards, coming down the pipeline in the Sword and Shield era. But as of right now, I think searching a lot of these out might be an issue, with the exception of maybe Celebi as an example, since we do have Netball. But the others might be a little bit more difficult to actually find out of your deck. So one thing you touched on too, Xander, about the HP is I'm very curious, what are like normal Stage 2 and Stage 1 Pokemon going to be looking like in this era? Are we going to see Stage 2s finally creep up to like 180 HP and stuff like that? Because I have noticed over the course of the Sun and Moon era, some of the Stage 2 HPs are creeping up a little bit. Like we have Pokemon like Aggron and Rhyperior, as an example, have crept up from previously being in like the 140, 150 HP range in the Black and White XY era. They've creeped up to the 170, 180 HP range. So I'm curious if less tanky Stage 2 Pokemon are even going to get up to that amount. So there's like all sorts of implications and things you can kind of infer just from the design of some of these cards.
I definitely think that they'll get there. Like, there's a Gallade in Dream League that has 160, and I wouldn't consider Gallade to be like a, quote, bulky Pokemon.
That's true.
So I definitely think that we're moving in that direction. We've had Slacking is another one that's had 180 HP printing. So I definitely am not at all surprised to see these HP go up. The Meganium that has seen some play on and off has 150 or 160, and I know that Swampert's in the 150 or 160 boat too. And so I definitely think that like if this is the direction that the HP of the Ultra Rares is moving, that the HP here is going to go up too. And if V Maxes are going to have 330, or at least the one Pokemon V that was shown with Pikarom staring at it at Worlds, then I think that we're going to see that here. V Maxes, we haven't seen one yet, but from the text of the Zamazenta's ability, it says something about prevent all, and then it's blurred out from your opponent's V Maxes. What Eric and I talked about a little bit before this, and you can touch on this more, is that V Maxes are going to be like the Dynamax from the video games in the trading card game. So that's how we're going to kind of see that implemented here. Obviously, they'll get like an HP buff, kind of like a Mega Evolution. Don't necessarily know anything about how a Pokemon would VMAX. There's no rules text on any of these cards for how they VMAX, which is interesting to note. So that means that it's either on like another card or the VMAX itself. But definitely think that if people aren't excited about these, it's kind of because they're like the baby EXs that go underneath a Mega, kind of a similar trend here.
Well, yeah, and that's one thing we can speculate a little bit about right here is if you'll notice, generally speaking, I think all these cards are, they're kind of okay. Like I said, with the exception of Tapu Koko, I think all of these are just kind of average cards. And I'd like to speculate on why that is. So I'm not sure if these cards are purposefully a little bit underpowered because they are going to VMAX, much like in the way that Mega Evolving EXs were a little bit underpowered. Like your base form Blastoise EX, your base form Gardevoir EX were substantially weaker than your average EX at the time, like Yveltal, Mewtwo, etc., until they Mega Evolve. So I'm not sure if it's something like that in this case, where they are purposefully nerfing these cards a little bit outside the HP because they are going to eventually VMAX, or are they a little bit average because of they are just starter deck cards, and a lot of times starter deck exclusives aren't as strong as their set counterparts. So it's probably too early to actually tell on that, but I'd like to think, fingers crossed, that it's because they're going to VMAX and that the general trend for Pokemon V is that they will have high HP, give up two prizes, but will be generally underpowered until they VMAX. I think that's my own personal hope. But overall, I think all these cards are kind of okay. It's hard to really say for certain, especially too, without knowing what is in the full Sword and Shield set. There might be something that searches out Pokemon V, for example, or gives a buff to Pokemon V in some way. But I think right now Tapu Koko is probably my favorite out of all of these. Would you agree or disagree with that, Xander?
Yeah, I definitely think that Coco is the best out of this bunch that we've seen so far. Victini comes up at a close second. It's kind of hard to commit energy onto it just because a 190 two price Pokemon is still a liability. Like there's so many decks that can do more than 190. But if you welder and attach, you can hit a Regizard that has 4 energy for 210 in one turn. So if it has a little bit of damage on it, you can knock that thing out pretty easily. So the damage does add up pretty fast to be able to use like the attacks here. Some Mew Mews end up with a lot of energy on them, so you might be able to use this to one shot a Mew Mewtwo. Just the damage. How funny is it that like 30 times with a supporter lets you put 2 energies into play might not be good enough? Like it's just so funny to me that like this is the direction that we're going, and we haven't even seen any of the V Maxes yet.
Yeah, and especially because we haven't seen VMAX, it's really hard to know exactly where these cards are going to stand just yet. But at the very least, it's nice that we're finally seeing these Pokemon V in full. We saw the Zacian and Zamazenta got like partially revealed at Worlds, but we haven't had any full reveals yet. So cool to finally see some of these Pokemon V. I'm sure we'll be getting more revealed in the coming months. As well. But for the moment, guys, also too, sound off down below in the comment section. I know we said we like Tapu Koko-V as our favorite, but which ones are you guys excited about for the moment too? So the next batch of news that we got for Sword and Shield is our first look at some new supporter cards that are coming out, much like the Pokemon V we previously looked at. These are going to be included in Japan's upcoming starter set V decks. So these are also going to be Star Deck exclusives for the moment in Japan. So the first one we're going to be looking at is going to be Marnie. This says, both players shuffle their hands without looking and put them at the bottom of their decks. Then you draw 5 cards and your opponent draws 4 cards. And then the other card that got revealed, which has a lot of people talking, is Professor's Research. It says, discard your hand, draw 7 cards. So of course here, Professor's Research is going to look very similar to Professor Sycamore and of course Professor Juniper previously. And that's caused a lot of discussion in the community. Marnie hasn't been quite as controversial, but definitely an interesting card. I think most of our discussion will be probably based around Professor's Research. But Xander, what do you think about Marnie here? I think this is an interestingly designed supporter. Like, we've seen shuffle your hand into your deck and draw cards, but we haven't seen shuffle your hand, put it at the bottom of your deck, then draw. It's a kind of a weird effect,
Isn't this card just inherently better judge unless you're like trying to get to a lower hand size, because your opponent's always going to get to 4, and whenever you play judge, you're not playing it to put yourself at 4 cards, you're playing it to put them at 4 cards. So isn't this just a judge where you draw an extra card?
Yeah, well, I guess you could make the argument that if there's a card you need to draw back into, like for a combo of some sort, putting one of those pieces at the bottom of your deck might not be good. But I think, generally speaking, yes, this is just going to be better than Judge.
I get what you're saying, but it's kind of hard to like uh, analyze that in the form of like gameplay data, where it's like this is like in a vacuum, this is probably just a better card than Judge. But like, of course, there's going to be a time that you need to hit like Fire Energy and something else, and if you don't hit both, it's not worth it. But if you hit both, then it's good.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that this is probably just going to replace Judge. I mean,
I think so. Unless you're a deck that actively wants Judge Whistle for some reason in your deck as well.
oh yeah,
I think that's one of the only incentives to play Judge, really. But generally, I would agree. I think this is probably just better most of the time, outside of those, highly specific situations.
but Professor's Research, this card is the card that people are talking about a lot. Notably, when you look at it, it is called Professor's Research. It is not called Professor Magnolia.
But on the side of the card, I know it's in Japanese, but right under where it says supporter in Japanese, it says Professor Magnolia. And, I think that's very relevant because to me, that kind of implies we're going to be having multiple cards with the Professor Research name, but featuring different characters, meaning you'll have multiple cards with this name that do different things. To me, that's kind of what this card is hinting at. Would you agree with that, Xander?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And for people wondering why is that important, since you can only play 4 cards of a certain name in your deck, they can make a bunch of cards called Professor's Research and make them all like pretty good, like cards that you would want to play 4 of this one and 4 of that one if you could. But since they're all named Professor's Research and they say like the professor that it is in parentheses, you can play. You'd only be able to play like 2 and 2 or 3 or 1 or 4 and 0. And on a deck list, you'd probably just put like Professor's Research dash Professor Magnolia, but the named text that's in the bold is Professor's Research. So I think that creates a really cool design, kind of like a Tag Whistle, being able to search for like the tag team supporters. They can make an item card that lets you search for Professor's Research, or an attack that's like if you played a Professor's Research this turn, but they have like different kinds of effects. Maybe they could make like a Versus Seeker just for Professor's Research, and maybe make like a research engine. I think it definitely is neat because if they make other Professor's Researches that are good enough that decks would want to play them, you have to play those at the cost of not playing Sycamores in your deck, which I think a lot of decks would be fine with. There are so many decks that get to large hand sizes. I mean, all the Welder decks easily end up with like 10 or so cards in hand at any given point. So I don't see those decks as something that's going to want to play Professor's Research, Professor Magnolia, if you will. But a deck like Pikarom, which is still like trying to churn through its deck, I think would be fine with this effect. So it's neat because they're giving us a lot of supporters to differentiate the way that you can build these kind of decks. And if they do this too and name a bunch of cards Professor's Research, then they're on track to kind of keep deck building interesting.
So when I first saw this card, I was initially in the camp that a lot of people are in, where they are really bummed to see Sycamore or Juniper, this type of effect come back, just because this type of effect most benefits highly aggressive all basic decks, because very frequently stage 2 decks and evolution decks have too many moving pieces to reliably get good effect off of this without discarding crucial cards like rare candy, etc. So much like with the rest of the community, I of course was kind of outraged to see more support for these huge basic decks. And if you've been watching our channel for a bit, you'll notice that's something we have griped about for a long time, is the game kind of pushing those types of cards, and we need less of those. We need things that actually encourage evolution cards and setup decks, because that's when this game is at its best. Historically, if you look back at any of the eras of the game that people recollect the most fondly, it's evolution decks and setup decks. So the fact that we're getting cards that incentivize these big dummy basic decks is bad. I think that is a terrible thing for the game. But I really like if they were going to bring this card back. I love how they brought it back, because now, like we're saying, people are going to have to probably pick and choose between what research cards they want in decks. So just think if they reprinted something like Guzma or Lysander as well as a Professor's Research. These are both cards, as an example, that big aggressive decks would want in their deck. They absolutely would want to play both. But the issue is now they would have to pick and choose. So I really hope that Pokemon designs this card around where there are multiple Professor's Research that would work well in a given deck and force people to pick between multiple different ones. Like, hey, if you are going to be your big dummy aggro deck, then guess what? You're not going to be able to run 4 of this and 4 Guzma, as an example, or 4 of whatever similar effect would be. So that's something I really, really do like. And I think this is a kind of a concept they can even expand on throughout the course of the Sword and Shield series. They can keep printing maybe more of these types of professors' research throughout the entire era if they wanted to. So I think this mechanic that they have is really cool. I mean, I guess technically we don't know for certain that this is how it's going to work, but it's heavily implied, and I think we have to work under the assumption that it's going to work in this way.
I mean, I'm aggravated that it comes back, but I would rather it come back like this than like as a supporter that you could just definitely play 4 of. So I think that if they make more of these professors researchers, that it becomes really interesting. The only concern that I have is that they make a bunch of professors researches and they all are like good, but they are very clearly meant for a certain style of deck, like whether or not there's one for like a control deck or one for a stage 2 deck or one for someone like that. Then it's just like, oh, okay, I am playing the stage 2 deck. I want to play the one that helps the stage 2 deck the most. I hope that they don't slot out that way so that it does just become boring and like you're just playing 4 of the best one that works for your strategy. I think that there's been a lot of really neat draw engines. I don't even know how many decks would play Sycamore as a 4 of if it was around right now. So I think that if there's a time to introduce it, this is probably the time.
And then speaking of supporters as well, we also did get a new rule change that got announced alongside all of this news as well, that in the Sword and Shield era, the player going first can't play a supporter card on their first turn. So this isn't really too unusual to see. Usually when a new block of cards starts, there historically have been rule changes over the years. I think the Sun and Moon era was one of the few exceptions where we did not get an updated rule change, but like previously XY changed the rules where the around that time player going first couldn't attack. And we've seen other variations on the restrictions on the first turn of the game throughout the history of the game here. So this is just another one of these rule changes. This was actually one of the topics we were going to cover in our original version of this video. We were going to speculate on potential rule changes that could come to the game. And this is one of those things for me, I'm not really sure how I feel about either way. We really don't know how impactful or how good or bad this is until we see what cards are going to be printed in Sword and Shield. So I think one of the big things is that setup decks don't have a great way at actually getting set up if they go first now. So you can't go for that Professor Elm's lecture on the first turn as an example. For me to say if this is good or bad, we would need to see what other effects are being printed. Are we going to get some sort of Pokemon with an ability that can help you get set up? Is Pokemon going to change the rules where you can attack on the first turn now? There's, I think, a lot of questions that are raised right now to really know, I think, if this is a good or bad thing.
I think it could be like the best thing or the worst thing that's ever happened to Pokemon recently, and I can't say that it's anywhere in the middle. I definitely think that if you apply it to the standard environment right now, it is really interesting. You put the welder decks in this position where they choose that they might want to go second to get the energies off. The greens versions of Reshizar that were playing Volcanion were already kind of fine to go second. I think now they might 100% choose to go second. Decks might up their counts of Day-to-Day just to see more of their deck on turn 1 because they can't play a supporter. So I think that there is like a really cool tension that this rule change makes. In terms of it being fair, I think it's fine. We've had no supporter turn 1s before. We've had stuff that's even more worse than that. Or when I say worse, I mean worse in air quotes. There's been like no trainer supporter stadiums turn 1. There were times that you could attack turn 1 and do everything. So that was like a scary time where you could just get donked by like a Darkrai or a Thundurus or something like that. But now, where we're in like the no attack and no supporter turn 1, I think that it's probably like the healthiest that it's been in a while. I would have to play games with it. I mean, obviously this came out like a week ago, so I wouldn't know for certain. And it depends entirely on what they print. I think that if they make some more like, if you go first, you can use this attack, or things that like let you use it if you go first, that is really cool. The format that I am a little bit more curious about this for is expanded. Like, you shouldn't make rule changes with expanded in mind just because standard is like your primary focus when you design cards. Like Pokemon isn't designing cards to really think about their expanded interactions, which is why they're like, oh, Jesse and James, we're going to ban it before it even gets released. I think that for expanded, there's a lot more questions about whether or not you go first or second, or just do you totally change up your deck to play like a bunch of Acrobikes and Trainer's Mail so you can still get going? Archiestoisen expanded becomes laughable because you can't do that going first. So you probably just choose to go second unless you're playing something else. The ban list can probably get re-looked over if you're not playing supporters on your first turn of the game.
The ban list was one of the big things I think not enough people were talking about, because the reason that most of the cards in expanded are banned are because of the unfair advantages they create on the first turn of the game. So like Hex Maniac, Jesse and James, Delinquent, etc. These are cards that can heavily disrupt your opponent before they even get a chance to draw a card or do anything. And that's really the reason that these cards aren't allowed to see play. So we'll have to see, I hope you didn't like sell all of your full art Wallies and full art Hex Maniacs and all that. So we may see a retooling of the ban list. That's something very important to look at. Another thing to maybe speculate on is, at different points in the game, whenever you call the coin flip at the beginning of the game, in certain formats, you've done so after you've actually drawn your opening hand. So I'll have to see, if something like that changes as well, because that would actually allow you to decide, better if you want to go first or second. So again, we don't know if they're going to allow you to attack now in place of playing a support. We don't know when you are going to call the coin flip. Again, there's just a lot of questions in the air to really have a solid opinion on this. But I think if they are going to change this to where you can't play a supporter, there still needs to be powerful setup tools available. So Xander, you mentioned Dedenne GX as an example. Well, I'd agree that does kind of get around this. Think of your one prize decks. Needing Dedenne GX to set up on turn one with a one prize deck just seems terrible, because that mitigates the entire reason you're playing a one prize deck. Again, that's where my biggest concern lies. I think the welder decks and all of the big dummy basic decks they're going to be fine either way, but it's really the setup decks, the one prize decks, that I think could be most disproportionately at a disadvantage from this rule change without something being done to still allow them to get set up. But again, it's hard to really say just yet because we don't know what's coming in the set. We don't know all of the details about how the first turn is going to look. But at the very least, it's exciting to see that we're finally getting a lot of this crucial info on the Sword and Shield era of the game.
Yeah, I think another thing for me about the supporter rules change is that I feel like if they were going to announce other rules changes, they probably would have done it at the same time. So I'm just going to look at this at face value. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's like, maybe we can bring back first turn attack if decks aren't comboing off, but then there's like, with Tapu Koko-V, I can play 2 Electro Powers and donk your basic and draw 2 cards. Like, that seems pretty good.
Or like Gengar Mimikyu GX. I think that's one that's super cancerous if you're going first.
Gengar Mimikyu, you don't get a turn, and then I donk you on your next turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a game. You can probably donk them with just the Gengar Mimikyu, because since they didn't play anything, they probably have some trainers in their hand. If they have like a 200 HP or less Pokemon, they're probably just dead. So I definitely hope that there's probably not a turn 1 attack, especially after thinking about Gengar Mimikyu. Outside of that, I think it is probably good for the game. Like, I think there's enough tension now that people might question to go second, and there's not been a lot of times that people have wanted to go second. Like, there's times in the Night March mirror where, like, maybe it was right to go second, times when Zapdos was a deck that maybe it was right to go second, but, like, even with this, it's not like we're like, yeah, you want to go second.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things. I really wish they would bring back the coin flip after your opening hand. That way you actually kind of know if you want to go second or not, and because I think blindly guessing, especially with Pokemon having such a poor mulligan mechanic compared to other games like Magic, you might call the coin flip before you draw your opening hand, thinking, yeah, my hand's gonna be gas, I'm gonna play my supporters, get set up, and then you call the coin flip, you choose to go second, and you don't have a good hand, and because of the way Pokemon's mulligan system works, you're stuck with it unless you don't have any basics. So I'm actually really hoping they change the coin flip to after you get set up. So that's one thing I would definitely like to see come back in addition to this supporter change as well. Of course, guys, what do you think about this supporter change? Do you think it's a good thing banning them on the first turn? Are there any other things you want to happen on the first turn as a result of this support change? Of course, let us know down below in the comment section what you guys are thinking about this topic. Alrighty guys, so next up we're going to be talking about just kind of like what we hope for the Sword and Shield era of the game. Every era of the card game has its own kind of themes that run throughout each of the sets in terms of, what's good, the types of cards that get printed. So we're going to talk about, some of our hopes and also some of our speculation. So I think one of the big ones that has a lot of questions unanswered still is the whole VMAX mechanic. That's one thing me and Xander have been kind of scratching our heads for a while to see, how they might make this mechanic. All we got was, of course, the one little teaser card at Worlds. Actually, not so little. They showed it to be gargantuan at 330 HP. So that's about the extent that we know about VMAX. But, there's definitely a lot of routes they could go with this. We don't know, is this going to work similar to Mega Evolutions? Is it going to be closer to like level X's or break Pokemon? And I put out a tweet the other day on our Twitter account at Rare Candy TCG, if you guys don't follow us already. But, we were talking about Pokemon VMAX, and ideally kind of what I want to see from the mechanic is, average attacks and average abilities from the base forms, like we kind of saw with the Pokemon V that we went over in this video. But for the VMAX, I'm hoping that the max in the name isn't counted as part of the name. The only part that matters is the V in particular. That they give up 3 prizes, and ideally that VMAX lasts as a 3-turn power-up. That's something I know Xander really wanted to see. And so the reason I want all these things is because obviously we want normal evolution cards to be good. We want to be able to play with the cards that are the most interesting and the most fun to use in the game. And Pokemon has, had a long streak now ever since probably like the 2012, late 2011 era of the game, has really been just pushing basics for the longest time. And we've seen them course correct at a couple different points in the game. Like the early Sun and Moon era was actually very, very good. Probably all through Burning Shadows, we saw tons of Stage 2 decks see play. Even back during the Lost Thunder format, I think that's actually one of my personal favorite formats in recent memory of the game. And every time Pokemon course corrects, they waste no time printing something just completely egregious that ruins the state of the game, like tag teams. Tag teams, as good as they are, I think are not a good mechanic for the game. I don't think it's good that we have 270 HP basics we can just slap down when we have to rare candy and wait multiple turns to get 150, 160 HP Pokemon in play by comparison. So right now, just for the longest time, the game has really been punishing the most interesting decks that exist in the game. And so that's kind of where my hopes are for this mechanic.
I know you mentioned it, and I will mention it again. I really hope there's a 3-turn thing. They didn't really implement anything with Megas that was like you can only have one Mega in play, and I don't think they'll do it here because VMAXs are shiny and new, and like it's what they're going to sell, and it's how they're going to get the attention of children, and like I get it. They're probably not going to do it. But it would be so absolutely fair if VMAXs were only in play for 3 turns, just like how you can only Dynamax a Pokemon for 3 turns. I don't know how they would do it, if they would have something like a GX marker that you tick down. I don't think that they would, because in Expanded you have to have a GX marker and a VMAX marker and your normal board state, so I don't really see it happening. But it would just be the most fair thing that they've ever done if they only allow these things to be in play for 3 turns. It means that you can build your deck around it in the sense that like it is the all-star focus of your deck. It's like you get a power-up for the 3 turns, and that's what it is. And that's like exactly what it is in VGC. Like you get a stronger Pokemon for 3 turns, and then it's done. I hope that outside of that, the VMAXs are worth 3 prizes, like you said. If they're going to have 330 HP, then we definitely should see something like that. The thing that I'm just laughing about is that Magikarp and Wailord has 300 HP now. It's just like, are we going to have like a 400 HP Wailord coming up soon? Probably.
I know that was definitely on a lot of people's mind. Even when they showed Dynamax in the game in Gigantamax, people were like, oh god, how big is Wailord going to be on screen?
I mean, there's a part of that that's like a joke, but then there's another part of that that's like, okay, Wailord's whole thing is that it just has huge HP. So if we're going to get a 400 HP VMAX Wailord, we better get like at least 200 HP Stage 2s that aren't VMAXs. Like, we do see that their HP is going up over time, but the VMAX are just doing so much damage that if they want non-V Pokemon to compete, then they really need to bump up the HP and the damage of those too.
Well, I think that's where something like, if they're designing the Pokemon V, the base forms, to be, they're pretty tanky. They have a good amount of HP, but their attacks are going to be kind of average. They're not going to be like game breaking on their own. So that's where something, if you have like a VMAX mechanic that's a 3-turn type of thing, or they take up the same name, much like with level X Pokemon. I think if you implement those 2 rules, I think that non-V Pokemon and normal non-GX Pokemon have a chance to compete, because this huge buff is only going to be temporary, and their base forms are only going to be above average. They're not going to be game breaking on their own. So that's kind of my ideal scenario. But then I think that does kind of raise the question, well, how are these going to compete with tag teams that exist? So they have to be strong enough to compete with what's already in play in the Sun and Moon era of the game, but we also need them designed in a way where normal non-GX and one prize decks still have a chance to play against them. So if we see either a 3-turn rule, like we're saying, or we see them share the same name as the base form Pokemon V, I think either of those things greatly balance the mechanic. And again, this is all without us knowing exactly how it's going to work just yet, but based on what we know so far, I think that would be preferable. There's nothing wrong with having these super ultra powerful cards, but if you look back in the Diamond and Pearl era of the game, or of course the much beloved original EX era in like the mid 2000s, yeah, we had Pokemon EX at the time and they were very strong, but guess what, non-EX decks were still insanely powerful. Some of the best decks of that era that are most looked upon fondly are non-EX decks, like Meta Knight, just as an example. You need a format where both of these ultra powerful cards and their normal Pokemon counterparts can exist alongside each other. But I think there's actually other things they could do too. Like, think about the old EX era. This is something I wish they would do a much better job at. They have done a better job during the Sun and Moon era, but back during the EX era, the original one in the mid 2000s, so many cards excluded EXs from being able to be searched out, or whatever benefits they might have. We don't really see a lot of that. We don't have like a Cherish Ball type of card that says excluding GX. So that's another way they could balance these cards, is whenever they print a lot of these really great searching and support options, they exclude Pokemon V in the process. Or I would like to see them maybe say you can't search your deck in the case of a card like Celio's Network from before. Maybe say search your deck for a Pokemon excluding basic Pokemon with over 150 HP or something like that. So I think that's another way they could balance this mechanic and give more support and allow for the one prize decks and setup decks to still be viable.
One thing that I would like to see is that Megas, they had like the Spirit Link mechanic to Mega Evolve the Pokemon, symbolic of the Mega Stones from the video game. I don't know why they were not called Mega Stones. That was the most aggravating thing to me of all time. But in the video game, Pokemon can only Dynamax in a stadium where the gyms are, or in the wild area. I hope that the mechanic to put a VMAX into play is that you have to have a stadium, and it would have like a normal effect of some variety, and then the bottom would say like, this stadium allows you to VMAX your Pokemon V. And then that's like flavorful for the game. It means that we can play stadium removal to allow your opponent not to VMAX their Pokemon, just like how a Field Blower or a Startling Megaphone in that time period, I'm getting my eras mixed up, would get rid of the Spirit Link so they couldn't Mega Evolve immediately. If the VMAX have like the your turn ends clause, that'd be cool too. And then the stadiums maybe say like, this does not cause VMAXing to end your turn. But if you just couldn't VMAX at all unless you had the stadium in play, like, it forces the decks to take up those spots to be willing to play VMAXs. And then on top of that, if they count only as like you can only play 4 total, then it's like even more punishing. So you're getting great value, assumedly, off of a 330 HP VMAX Pokemon that does a ton of damage, gives up 3 prizes, but who cares? But you have to kind of jump through some hoops to get it into play. So I think that not only would that make it fair because it becomes more like a stage 2, like this is not a perfect comparison, but like with Megas, you had your basic, your Spirit Link was like your rare candy in quotes, and then the Mega was the stage 2. The difference being that you can put the Spirit Link on the Pokemon, and you had to have the rare candy and the stage 2 together. But with this, it's kind of similar, where you kind of have to get 2 pieces to put the VMAX into play. So that's something that I would like to see for the Pokemon Vs, because it's like flavorful to the games, which is obviously important to me. But then outside of that, it becomes really interesting in the card game as well.
This is something I was thinking about lately, is like, I don't know if we're just getting old, but I can't help feel like the grouchy old man is like, man, things were better back in my day, back when you could actually evolve Pokemon and you couldn't do 200 on the first turn. Like, I don't know.
Building all these 2017 decks is like so refreshing. That's like, I was playing Alolan Ninetales GX the other day, and I was like, DCE 50. Heck yeah. Your move. Tell me what you're going to do about it. Or like playing Drampa Zoroark, it's like, I use Mind Jack for 100.
I have to say, like, I've always looked back at like the old, especially the EX era and Diamond and Pearl era, like, quite fondly. But it'd been years since I had actually really picked up the cards and sat down. But when we were at Worlds this past year, we had some time to play like just old format decks and Worlds decks, and I was like, okay, I'm not just blinded by nostalgia. This is significantly better than how the game is now.
I mean,
So
even then, like thinking back now, Psychic Lock Gardevoir, the menace for the entire time that it was legal, both when it started and then whenever DZE came back in, it kind of had a resurgence. Even like the Weavile variant saw play. That deck was like, okay, stage 2, 2 attachments unless you have Scramble, 60 or 50 if you have a double rainbow.
yeah,
I don't want to talk about this the whole time because I know that we could just do this whole thing for another hour. That we just
yeah. Maybe
complain
that's a
about games
video
like
in and
that.
of itself we do one day.
Yeah. How bad is power creep? Put it in the comments if you want to hear it.
But yeah, there's definitely a bunch of other stuff about the Sword and Shield era. We kind of talked a little bit already about a rule change. I know that was a topic we were going to try to get to in our original concept of this video. Are there any things that you in particular want specifically from a rule change?
Maybe just like some way to make it easier to get stage 2s into play. Like, I don't know why Rare Candy was ever nerfed. I don't know why it has not been like unnerfed. I feel like it'd be totally fine right now. In Expanded, you would have to change some things. Like you'd probably just ban Vileplume instead of like Forest Giant Plants. But I think that Rare Candy is a totally fine card, especially in Standard, to have be able to play it on your first turn or on a Pokemon that was just put into play. With cards like Swampert, it could really up the consistency of the non-GX decks. So that'd be something worth considering. Just like anything to make evolution easier. Like maybe if one of the wild area cards is like once during your turn you may evolve a Pokemon that you put into play this turn or that has already evolved this turn. So it's not like just broken time space, but you get to do that once per turn. Maybe like an Evo Soda card that like search a deck for a Pokemon that evolves from one of your Pokemon in play. Then you may evolve that Pokemon, shuffle your deck afterward, but like you couldn't play it on the first turn of the game, so it's not just a Wally situation. I think that'd be like really neat. Just some way to kind of keep the fact that evolution is an important part of the game. Like I think that where people get stuck is that the thing that makes Pokemon different from any other game that like there is in like a relevant card game form is the fact that we have Pokemon that evolve. They change, they do a bunch of different stuff, and it's really cool that we get to go from like this little baby Pokemon to this big like Charizard or Garchomp or Salamence or whatever. That's like really cool looking and really intimidating and fun, but we just have all these like really big shiny GX basics that you get to put into play.
It's just weird because evolution in the video game, just like the Pokemon series in general, it's like it's one of the like iconic things about it, and it's something that just isn't really represented in the card game. Like obviously we have cards that evolve and all that type of stuff, but in terms of their competitive viability, it's not something Pokemon chooses to push very much at all. And I really don't understand it. Like I get that printing the big shiny GXs and stuff like that is what incentivizes sales, especially for little kids. They want to pull their really big powerful cards, but you could still have that stuff and make your evolution cards be good, because the kids don't care about how viable the GX cards are most of the time. You know, they're just collecting them. They're kids. But the players, they want cards that are actually fun to use to play the game. And I know this was just in general one of the big topics that was on our Sword and Shield wish list, is to course correct and enable evolution. I think unnerfing Rare Candy would be, amazing. I would definitely be a fan of that. There are certain cards that would be problematic as a result, like Amistar and Kabutops, I think. But even if they don't unerrata the Rare Candy and unnerf it, there's still things they can do to properly incentivize this type of stuff.
If they have to ban 5 stage 2s to make 100 stage 2s good, I mean, probably not that much. If they have to ban 5 stage 2s to make like 30 stage 2s viable at like some given point in time, I'm all for that. And Expanded is a format that I don't mind being just like all the basic decks, because in Expanded, it's just like a hot mess of you can play all the best cards from every era. You can really just like do whatever you want in that format. But outside of that, for Standard, where it's gonna be slower or like quote should be slower, it becomes a question of like about design philosophy. Like, does the Pokemon Company want evolutions to be supported, or do they want us to like be really focused on the main mechanics that they put in? Like, I think that if they just want us to focus on the main mechanics they put in, then they should just like stop releasing sets, only release boxes that have the GXs for $20 each, and then just like go on with their day. instead of wasting all this time on like cards that are like almost good enough, but there's just no way they can beat a 330 HP 3/5 Pokemon.
Like, think of, if you guys have seen any of our set reviews, there's always a couple of stage 2 Pokemon or even stage 1s that we look at and we're like, man, this card is really, really cool. And like, it has all this support. And even with that, it still might not see play. Like, think of the new Breloom that just came out back in Unified Minds, or the Aegislash that came out back in Unified Minds, or even in the upcoming set. There's a bunch of, in a vacuum, very, very good stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon, but they just might not see play due to all of the tag teams and being gate kept by Malamar to a degree. And that's just a shame when all of the cards that are the most fun to sink your teeth into aren't that viable. It's a really just a huge issue in the game, I think. And as you can tell, we're pretty passionate about this being addressed going forward. So in terms of like specific cards, we kind of talked about Rare Candy being unerrated. We can maybe even start talking about maybe some reprints and stuff like that. We like maybe see like a Broken Time Space type of thing come back. I don't know if that would be healthy, but think along those lines. Are there any like sort of cards we want to see come back into the game that might have been MIA for some time now, Xander?
I mean, just anything that can support evolution decks, like evolutions that reward you for having evolutions. Like, I think there's a lot of really good evolutions that we have right now that get the ball rolling. Like Nidoqueen, Meganium, and Swampert, like that deck has like been together a little bit, putting each of those consistency pieces together. But those are really cool, unique cards that like exist and allow you to get more stage 2s out. The problem is like we're stuck getting the one stage 2 out to get our other stage 2s out. So maybe if there's like a little bit more consistency on like the shallow end, where like maybe even just something like Trade on a Pokemon that doesn't have a really good attack alongside of it would be like fine for standard. Silvally is like a great improvement for those decks. Rosa is a card that you'll hear them talk about in the set review. That card's really cool, but I wouldn't even be opposed to like this. It'd be really awkward how you word it because the Vs wouldn't know about the tag team mechanics. But essentially, like if you have no Pokemon V in play, search your deck for like 2 cards, show me your opponent, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Like that'd be really cool, just to reward you for not playing Pokemon Vs. But like I said, I think Pokemon wants you to play Pokemon Vs, and it's hard for them to make all these cards that like push those out of the environment. One of the coolest times for me, I think, was like I've done a ton of building for Primal Clash through Guardians Rising, but also like the Burning Shadows format where Golisopod and Gardevoir came out. We were in a universe where those decks were competing with like Mega Ray and Drampa and all those decks that had like come around that same time, and it was this really unique balance of like we have stage 2 decks, we have stage 1 decks, we have like really fast decks, we have decks that put a bunch of energies into play, we have slow decks, and there's just like this really healthy mix of like every deck is kind of doing its own thing. And I'd like to see a situation where the stage 2 decks are like sadly fast enough that they're able to compete with like a turn 2 330 HP Pokemon. Like, I mean, this is still based on a lot of assumptions. We don't know anything about VMAXing yet. We haven't seen any spoilers other than these random cards. So not entirely sure how that works out. Definitely think it's interesting.
All right, Xander, so hear me out.
All right, I'm ready.
We're gonna print a 1 prize basic Pokemon that attacks for a single colorless energy that reads, if your opponent's active is a basic Pokemon with a maximum HP of 170 or more, they are knocked out.
Stop.
That is the antidote for this insanity that has been in this game.
If you think about it, there's cards like Beedrill, which basically just says like kill both actives.
Yeah,
and I'm amazed that like that card. I feel like that card will see play eventually during some time in standard, just because the trade is going to end up being valuable. Like if we have a situation where we can get stage 2s out easier, Beedrill will see play.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's a stage 2. We need a basic that attacks for a colorless energy. That way.
Get out. Viewers are leaving the video right now.
That would course correct so hard. All of the best decks would not, like all of the most fun and interesting decks would not be affected by that. It'd be so amazing.
So you print a basic at rare or holo rare that basically says all of the cards that Pokemon is going to make money by advertising.
Yes.
Lose the
Kill
game.
them. Get them out of here.
Yeah. I got one more point. This is literally such a small thing, but every set, I always love how Pokemon changes the design of the cards, and
Yes.
there's like just the slightest design difference. Looking at a Sun and Moon card in comparison to, we saw a Grookey, a Scorbunny, and a Sobble come out. there's like slightly more curvature and like slashes and kind of how like the Pokedex line and the weakness retreat and stuff is. But then one thing I do notice is all of the text symbols have a white border around them,
Like the energy symbols and stuff?
Yes, all the energy symbols have a white border around them, kind of like if they were on a full art card.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me. It's like this doesn't. It looks similar enough that like if you put it next to a Sun and Moon era card, that you'd think they're pretty similar unless you're staring at it. Which maybe is the point to kind of keep it like that. Like the Pokedex entry is still in the bottom corner, all the set info's on the left. Weakness, resistance, retreat is all horizontal in the middle. But it's like it is different when you look at it and you stare at it. So it's like a small improvement. Yeah. I'm interested.
Yeah, and that's one thing I was actually really curious for. I'm always excited to see how they change the card template. I was really bummed when XY came out and they literally changed nothing.
Didn't do anything.
Well, they changed the holo pattern on holo rares. That's the only thing they changed.
Oh, okay, fine. If you dare call that anything different.
Yeah. Now, one thing I definitely would like to see, and if you guys ever watch like our pack ripping videos I occasionally do, this is something I definitely whine about a lot, is in Japan, the borders of their cards for their holo rares are holographic and not the normal yellow border. That's one thing I thought was great that they did starting back in black and white, and we've never gotten that. The only thing we've had like that have been A-Specs and, of course, Prism Stars, GXs, etc. But that's one thing I really would finally like to see them adopt. I'm really not sure why they don't do that. Like, if their point is to sell cards by making them look cool, then I don't know if it's like drastically more expensive to do that or something, but I think definitely need to get on that.
Well, I will say this. I really, really like how the Pokemon Vs look so far. Like, it's really cool having the black border and the black for like the weakness, resistance, retreat line near the HP. That type line is actually like a little bit thicker than I believe it would be on a normal card, but it might just be like the angle that it's taken at. But I think it is. It's so weird. Since the cards don't have a GX attack, it looks like the text takes up so little of the card, but it's like awesome. It's like if they have an ability and 2 good attacks, then like maybe we're in some territory. But like if you look at one of these Pokemon Vs next to like Alolan Ninetales GX from Lost Thunder or Glaceon GX, there is so much text on those cards, and these like really showcase the artwork and the design. So I'm really excited for that. They're just like beautiful looking cards. It's like they're like regular art cards, probably. Like I don't think these would be like what a full art looks like. I don't know. These just look full art as is. It looks closest to like the Agent Trains because the art takes up like 3/4 of the card and then kind of solidifies near the bottom.
That's exactly how the current GXs are. They're the same way though.
Yeah, but since the GXs have the GX attack, it just looks like you barely get to see any of the art.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But I mean, I would still expect them to have full arts. I was actually going to say, from a collector's perspective, one thing I really hope they do away with are the rainbow rares. I thought those were absolutely hideous. I feel like no one likes them. Like I don't know anyone who prefers those over normal full arts, or especially the alternate full arts that have been coming out. So I really hope they condense the amount of rarities of cards down a bit, because we don't need 4 arts of a certain GX. I mean, unless you're doing like a special promo art for a 10 or something like that. But just like out of a set, just give us the card and give us like a full art version. That's good. If you want to make like a shiny version as a secret rare, or like a gold card as a secret rare, that's a little bit different. But like we don't need 2 different full arts plus a rainbow rare plus the gold cards that have been coming out as well. We just don't need all that.
Yeah, looking at a GX in comparison to these, there's like a black area near where the HP is that I think looks really cool. Then the black border instead of like the gray and silver, or the gray and black border that kind of goes around the tag teams. And then the art for the GXs goes down a little bit farther, but like I'm going to keep talking about how the GX attack just takes up so much room on the card. It really is neat just like being able to see so much of the art for these cards. I think they'll probably have a full art, and I guess I don't really have a horse in the race of getting rid of rainbow rares. Like I will say this though, I feel like anytime I play in a tournament, I'm much more likely to see full arts than I am to see rainbow rares. Not necessarily like there is a part of that that's like cost, but like assuming that people had choices to use certain arts, like I think a lot of people are using the full arts more than they are the rainbow rares.
So we've gone on a pretty good minute just for the speculation elements. It's probably a good point to wrap this video up at. But yeah, a lot of new cool stuff coming from Sword and Shield. I think some people were a little disappointed at Worlds we didn't get full reveals for how these cards were going to look and stuff. So it's cool to finally see, at the very least, Pokemon V fully revealed in some capacity. Now, of course, we still haven't really seen much from the actual Sword and Shield set so far. All of the cards we talked about today are going to be from Japanese starter decks, which they will probably be lumped into our main set. But like I said, we haven't really seen much from the actual core set, so we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for whenever those reveals might happen. But yeah, guys, I know we had a lot of calls to action in this video, but of course, sound off down below and let us know what you think about all these cards and, you know, what you hope to see from the Sword and Shield era of the game. But if you guys did enjoy this video, of course, feel free to like and subscribe and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.